My favorite thing that conservatives do online is when they post pictures of empty shelves at their grocery store and go, "Oh, this is like communism." Yeah, so I guess it's communism now when the capitalist supply chains break down for a capitalist store in a capitalist country. These people literally do not know what socialism or communism is. For them, it's just a general phrase to describe anything they don't like.
As this TikToker has pointed out, you might have noticed that Republicans love calling things communism. Basically, anything in the world that they think is bad, they will immediately call communism, especially when you talk about systemic failures of capitalism. When people can't afford to get healthcare, they say that's communism. When things aren't arriving on the shelves at stores, they call that communism. But is it really? The answer is, of course not. Okay, before we move forward, I need to define some terms for you very quick. This is very, very important. Communism is a moneyless, classless society. It is fundamentally democratic. It is where not only is the political system, but also the economic system are under the democratic control of the public at large. And there is not a state that uses coercive force to impose its will on others. Now, socialism is a transitory state where you have a state that works to suppress the interests of capital to the benefit of the workers. This is the definition of these two words based on the theorists that invented these words and developed on them. And one more note, when right-wingers cry about socialism or communism controlling people's lives, what they're really complaining about is them as rich people losing control over their workers. Because if workers have democratic control over the workplace, that means owners and managers don't. And while they try to claim it's all about, oh, the government controlling your life, I hate to break it to you, but right now you have two different entities controlling your life. Not only do you have the government telling you what you can and can't do with laws, but you also have people like Jeff Bezos running around telling their employees what to do. And the funny thing about that is, under capitalism, if no employer thinks that you're following their orders good enough, you starve and you lose your health care and your housing. I personally would rather leave it up to democracy myself. But why do Republicans do this? I mean, the answer is quite simple. By claiming that any failure of capitalism is actually communism, what these right-wingers are doing is they're convincing people that we're really just too far to the left. What we really need to do is move further to the right. Clearly, we have too much communism going around here. This is how a literal fascist movement inside the United States maintains its energy. People like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert running around crying about corporate communism, which is absolutely ridiculous on its face. So the idea that a supply chain largely organized by the CEO of Walmart or Target or Amazon is somehow communism is absolutely ridiculous. In the United States, our economy is largely dictated by a very small handful of CEOs for giant corporations that have huge role to play in the supply chains of basically everything and control people's working condition. And people don't feel like they have control. People correctly assess that they do not have much material control over how they live in the United States today. When you show up to work, you have to do what your boss tells you. You have to work the hours that your boss tells you. And to make matters even worse, your boss can change your schedule on a whim and you would just have to deal with it. This type of extreme level of control over people's lives is what makes so many Americans feel miserable about everything. When you add on top of that the crippling debt that people face, both from going to college and from going to the doctor, it's pretty easy for people to feel trapped. And when you have a popular narrative of communism just being when other people have control over your lives, then it's very easy to trick these people into thinking that that's communism. But the truth of the matter is, it couldn't be further from the truth. The whole notion of capitalism is the idea that the economy should be run by and for capital, which ends up meaning just the people that have the access to the most amount of capital. So in the United States, our economy is run by the richest people. That's called capitalism. That's how it works. But by creating this anti-communist fervor, claiming that every failure of our society is just proof that we have too much communism, and by claiming that this control that people have over their workers' lives is itself communism, offers people this idea that moving further to the right is the solution. But what would it mean for the United States to move further to the right? The only real way that the United States has to move further to the right is to embrace an openly fascist ideology where government institutions are privatized privatized. Remember, the word privatization was literally coined by Nazis, and that is not the world that we want to live in. I mean, think about it. Do you really want public schools to be a for-profit enterprise where there's an incentive to not only drive up the cost, but to also exclude poor people? And think about that in the context of basically any other government service. And if you say, Ben, the government services that we have right now are poorly run and not doing enough for working class people, I would agree with you 100%. We are definitely not doing enough. But the reason we're not doing enough is because large corporations have a huge influence on our government and they don't want these institutions to do more. The reason why we keep private prisons around is because there are companies that depend on the slave labor that prisons provide them. The reason why things like food stamps are so hard to get is because if people could rely on stability outside of the workplace, then people wouldn't be so desperate that they'd be willing to accept lower wages. You see, the poor management of the American government and all the institutions that provide benefits for people is an explicit technique that capital uses to make sure that you are poor and desperate and willing to take dirt wages and have no choice but to pay extreme costs for your necessities. The last thing I'll say is very, very important. We need to remember that all of the trappings of fascism, which is to say the terrifying police state, the extreme xenophobia, the violence towards marginalized people, all of these things are tools that were used to prop up what was in its origin an economic theory. And the economic theory of fascism was privatization. So the reason why you see Republicans pushing for privatization at the same time they're pushing for extreme racist violence is exactly because they are fundamentally at their core fascist.
This is Ben Carollo with Rebel Headquarters. You can catch my show Galaxy Brain on the Young Turks Twitch channel every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. If you want to stay up to date with my content, you can follow me at Benjamin Carollo on Twitter. And for those of you that might be wondering or have noticed, my pronouns are in fact she, her.